Welcome, everybody, to the 2024 Harvest Press Conference presented by the Napa Valley Grape Growers and the Napa Valley Vineyards. I'm Kelli White, the Director of Education at Meadowood in Napa Valley. Today, we'll be discussing the 2024 harvest season. We have a great lineup of experts who will be giving us their insights. I'll introduce them in just a second, but in the meantime, notice to all that are listening, the chat is not available for this webinar. However, you can submit questions in the Q&A. We've set aside about 5 minutes to answer questions at the end of this very short webinar. So we will be pulling questions at the end directly from what's submitted. So that's where to direct your attention. So thank you to my wonderful panel. We have, in no particular order, Matt Stornetta, who's the vineyard manager and owner of Stornetta Made Vineyard Management. Bertus van Zyl, who's the lead winemaker of Farm Collective. Richie Allen, the senior director of winemaking for Rombauer Vineyards, and Pauline Lhote, the winemaking director for CHANDON. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Kelli.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask a series of questions for you all to just jump in with anything, any insights in particular. We're going to cover the specifics of the growing season, the overview of labor this year. Of course, we're going to have to touch upon the wine grape market and changes there, and then just overall vintage characteristics. So let's get started by talking about the actual just characteristics of the growing season, starting with the pretty significant heat event that we had at the end of June and early July. Does anybody want to jump in and talk about any challenges that brought, or any sort of adjustments in farming that had to happen?
Yeah, Kelli, I'll start. For us, right out of the gates, I think from June really all the way to harvest here in early October, we saw pretty expansive heat. One metric that we sometimes use is just days over 100 degrees, and this year we counted nearly 38 to 40 based on the weather station among the valley, 38 to 40 days above 100 degrees. So that's a pretty big difference from years past, especially from 2023, where we had maybe 8 to 10. So that was a big factor that we were working with all year. Fortunately, we had really nice soil moisture from a heavy winter to really get those vines vegetative from the beginning to endure that heat.
Yeah, I think for us, it's another thing we were watching. It was the degree days, so the accumulation of the degree days. And obviously comparing it with the previous year, or actually the 5-year average, because last year was a little bit of an odd late vintage. And actually in June or July, we realized that the degree days were way higher than 2023. So for me as a winemaker, that's when I actually decided to move the interns 1 week earlier, because otherwise we were not going to make it on time. But I think the major heat wave we had in early July, luckily myself, I was in France, so I didn't suffer from the heat. But as far as the vines, we got lucky, like you said, Matt. I think we have plenty of moisture in the soil when we started with the growing season. We had early rain close to the start of the growing season that I think has helped. And there was good canopy growth. As for sparkling, we don't do as much leafing as we used to do. So the leafing helped really protect the grapes. And so that event, beginning of July, really didn't have a big impact for us. And luckily, it was before veraison. So it was actually at the better timing that it would have been after veraison.
Richie, Bertus, do either of you
Yeah,
want to-
no, I think for me, what I found was that it seemed like that heat event, that early heat event, just kind of set the trend for the season almost, like kind of set the vines up to be in that more stress, primed for kind of like surviving. And I was pleasantly surprised, even late in the season, with as warm as it was never that extreme. I feel like it was, I mean, extreme for us as people, but I think like the vines looked fine. Like I was, even in October, early October, when we were kind of in the thick of making a lot of picking decisions, I was very pleasantly surprised with how well the canopies were holding up, and and kind of seemed like the vines were in a really, really good place to handle the season.
And speaking of the October heat wave, I assume, Pauline, you were probably mostly in by then. How did that affect picking decisions and harvest timing for the rest of you?
It accelerated it. Yeah, it was interesting that we're always looking at the 10-day forecast, right? So how far out are we planning? And that, I think they forecast 100 degrees on that Monday, and then it added it to the Tuesday and the Wednesday, and it just kept extending into the forecast. It was at the tail end, so we were mostly through sort of like the bulk of harvest. We'd sort of hit the top of the bell curve or on the downside, but all that later ripening fruit, it definitely accelerated it. And you had to be pretty careful with your planning for tank space, labor, to make sure you weren't caught out for 10 days over 100 degrees.
Yeah.
And that came following, sorry, go ahead, Bertus.
No, go for it, man.
I was just going to say that came following a cooling pattern. The only week that we had of moderately cool weather. So the acids got to catch up. And I think from our side, we really just took a moment and we thought we had some reprieve in all of this. And then Labor Day comes around and, well, in typical Labor Day fashion.
Yeah. It was definitely that case of like, getting the grape growers heat alerts, and at some point you could hear the guy kind of exacerbated, like it's going to be another 100 degrees, and it seems like tomorrow is as well, and probably the day after that. So yeah, definitely made for interesting kind of planning. But I think I think flexibility was kind of key there. We were able to get a lot of blocks or blocks added to pre-planned picks that were kind of in the beginning stages of that heat wave. But I know that like if I had missed that window, that was kind of on that Saturday right before that heat started, that I was able to add a lot of things to the Tuesday and like the Wednesday. But if you missed that, then you were Saturday or Monday following the heat. So definitely, I know the vineyard managers we work with and the vineyards appreciated us showing up, at 3 a.m. unloading fruit and being kind of flexible with their schedules, because they were running multiple crews, as I'm sure you were, Matt, across the valley.
On that subject, in terms of, actual harvest date, it sounds like it was, much earlier than the previous year, which was kind of a later year. So how much earlier? When were you picking? So when did you start? When did you finish? And how does that compare to, Napa average?
So maybe I can start, since usually we start with sparkling. So on my side, for CHANDON, we started picking on August 2nd. I think that was the first day, and then we finished on September 2nd for the sparkling wines. Then we do have some still wines, so we finished that much later on. But it is, for me, it was a normal year in a way. Obviously, last year was 3 weeks later, but it trended like more a normal year. For me, I compared mostly with vintage 2018. I think it's one of the close ones. I think I was the luckiest among the panel in terms of weather, because for me, the whole month of August was just like really optimal conditions. So I'm always afraid with heat wave when it comes to sparkling, because we have a very short window of picking. So when a block is ready, we literally have 2 or 3 days to get going. But the whole month of August, we really have like the best condition, and we had super cold nights, which really preserved the acidity of the wines. So it ended up being like a really good vintage for sparkling wines.
Gentlemen?
Yeah, we started August 12th and finished October 12th. Pretty similar dates to 18, 16, and 13. All very different in terms of their profile, but yeah, I think we're just over 3 weeks earlier than last year. I mean, you couldn't get more polar opposites, could you? Like last year and this year in terms of weather and when we started. But overall, yeah, it was closer to what we would call normal in terms of start and finish dates.
Yeah, as we finished almost at the time we started the previous year. So it's how far different those vintages were.
I felt that heat certainly played a factor in the speed of ripening. As we started with bud break, after a pretty cold and wet winter, it was, average, spot on where we would have expected. And then as you were talking about the degree days, Pauline, it got things moving along quite a bit faster. So I thought, with our Sauv Blancs and our white varietals, maybe 7 days or so ahead of what an average would have been. And then, as we got through August and after Labor Day, things really started to come in a lot faster, and we maybe expanded that gap to 2 weeks in some cases.
Would anyone?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bertus.
No, yeah, we for Tank Garage, we source from kind of all across the state, and I feel like Napa was, like you were saying, Pauline, was in a really good place in August. Some other spots in the foothills, Central Valley, were more impacted. I feel like we were making some picking decisions based on kind of more challenging conditions when Napa was kind of cruising, but then everything else kind of fell kind of in line with what we were expecting and what would be normal, until we got to Napa, and it just compacted like Richie was saying, and it was like, okay, well, here we go. We're gonna finish all of our Napa fruit in 10 days.
Now, would anyone here like to comment on Hillside Vineyards in specific? Was dehydration more of a concern? Was the timing different than expected?
Yeah, I mean, we have vineyards across the length and breadth of Napa. Anytime you have, especially on the Alice Peak side of the valley, anytime you have a heat spell come, you tend to get very low vapor pressure deficit, which definitely leads to dehydration. So it's always a challenge. So whenever you have those heat spikes, yeah, I mean, stuff can go from kind of like sparkling wine. The window of opportunity becomes hours rather than weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a challenge. But overall, I think because the canopies were so healthy this year, because we had such good vegetative growth, things held up to the heat much better than we expected, which was really, really good. So it was a challenge occasionally, but not as much as we would have expected it to be.
Great. Well, let's move on and discuss labor. Specifically, 2 different points. How did you manage your teams and keep your people safe in some of the extreme heat of this year?
Yeah, our teams this year, labor availability was much less of a challenge than we've seen in years past. I think, the wage that we're able to pay here and, Napa, helps with that. In terms of safety and just kind of working around the conditions of the year, we harvested, I would say, probably 98% of our fruit in the night hours. So certainly allowed for more productivity and just kind of enjoyable working conditions.
We did a similar thing. With labor was not as short as it's been in previous years, but night harvesting, when it's cooler, when the crews are more comfortable, they go about 10 to 15% faster than they do when it gets hot, and then you don't have to stop. Night harvesting, I think this year we probably, I don't know if we're quite 98% like you, Matt, but we're probably in that low 90% spectrum for night harvesting across the board.
Bertus, would you like to comment?
Yeah, well, we only have one estate vineyard that we have some really great vineyard management for. So I don't do a lot of my own farming, but I work with a lot of growers, and kind of like I was saying, I was talking to people, and most people were able to add some blocks, but it meant like they would start picking at 10 o'clock in the evening, be ready to deliver to the winery by 1 a.m. and instead of having the whole crew, I'd either have a forklift out for them or I'd be there. And yeah, I think it's the most I've slept on a couch at the winery in a while. But it was definitely worth it. Just tasting the wines, it's pretty amazing. Kind of reminds me of a couple of the vintages in the teens that is kind of when I moved here.
Well, some of you had mentioned in the pre-call that we had that flexibility was really important in terms of bringing when you could pick and bringing fruit into winery. I mean, that must have required a certain level of gymnastics in terms of winery staffing. Can anyone talk about cellar staffing and labor and how that was managed in a year like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it, like for us during the growing season, and they were supposed to harvest a starting date of July 29. I quickly realized that I needed to bring them 1 week prior in order for them to have like the proper training, safety training before starting harvest. So that was the big thing that we've done and had to do so. And over the years, we changed a little bit the strategy of the people hopping for harvest. We're bringing about 22 to 25 seasonals. So that's quite a bit at the winery. And lately we've been bringing a lot more international, so students from all over the world, from South America, from France, from Italy, from Spain. So half of the crew for us is now coming from international. Then we get students who are lucky sparkling. We get to harvest before they go back to school. So we get to have students from, Cal Poly, UC Davis, and then obviously locals as well. So, and for us in terms of vineyard, we've always picked at night. It's always like everything is picked under the stars. So, and we are early, so the labor availability is not as much of an issue for us. Then we need to wrap up early when all of you guys are starting.
Yeah, it was interesting because we were doing so much night picking. We're similar to Pauline. We had people come from all over the world. We have about 18 seasonals that come in, saying South America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. We had more early starts. So most of our days we were starting between 4 and 5 a.m. at the winery and just trying to keep everyone fresh and happy. We spent a lot on feeding our teams this year to keep them going when people get tired. Feeding them and giving them a couple extra breaks really, really helps.
Logistics on our side. I mean, if Bertus is willing to leave the keys in a forklift, it's so much easier to get up and down the valley at 3 a.m. To deliver 2-3 loads than it is to try to do it 9 a.m. or 11 in the morning. Traffic just gets things backed up, and getting the fruit nice and cool to the winery as early and quickly as we can is, that's certainly easier to achieve in the mornings.
Right. Let's move on and talk about the wine grape market, which is probably one of the bigger talking points of the year. Would any of you like to comment on changes and complexities of the wine grape market this year?
Yep, from our side, and we assist a lot of our clients in selling fruit, and we put a lot of effort into the marketing of that. And we've had to really address the situation with our partners. So, some wine sales are not what they used to be. So, how can we work together to find something that allows us to weather the storm kind of mutually. So it's forced us to look at kind of pricing, maybe modifications, term modifications, but in the end, hopefully it allows for our world-class products to get to the consumer advantageously.
There's definitely more fruit available. So Rombauer, we're about half purchase fruit, half estate fruit. Definitely in the spring, I was getting lots of calls with fruit available. We had to do a few things like speed up payments to growers to make sure they get paid earlier, who are, it's a little bit challenging for them, things like that. But as we got further and closer to the harvest, it seemed like most of the fruit was getting sold. My phone definitely wasn't ringing as much. I don't know about you guys, but I haven't seen much fruit left unpicked. So Napa's pretty unique in that it's, even in a long market, the fruit is still highly sought after. I'll put it that way.
Did you see changes to pricing or anything like that?
Well, we did most of our contracts in the spring. So, we don't go out and source fruit cheap, or cheap fruit, if that makes sense, at the end. So we didn't see any of that. I can't speak to, I don't know if anyone else saw prices sliding.
No, I mean, for us, it's the same as you. It's a long-term relationship. So we've been having partners for, 20, 25 years. And obviously I've honored the contract. We don't necessarily needed all the fruit that we brought in, but it was important to obviously contracts are in place, and that's what we do. For us, like one thing that has helped in a way, it's yield on Chardonnay and Pinot. It was between 10 and 20% lower than what we thought, lower than the last 5-year average. So it has helped a lot in a way that we didn't bring as much fruit as we thought we would bring, but it's just because there was not any grapes on the vines.
That's actually a great point, Pauline. And somebody wrote in a question about yield. What about for the Bordeaux varieties or Zinfandel, other grapes? How are yields compared to average expectations?
So for me, on the Cabernet side, because we do make some still wines, Cabernet was actually a surprise, heavier, but definitely a shortage on Chardonnay and Pinot.
Yeah, ours was variable. So it was, I wouldn't say there was any particular varietal trends for us. It sort of depended where the vineyard was and when it flowered. We came in pretty close to our crop estimates, but that's because some vineyards were up and some vineyards were down. We didn't sort of we didn't get, I guess, hit. Obviously, Chardonnay is pretty important to Rombauer. We didn't see a shortage of Chardonnay, but yeah, it was overall, I'd say it was closer to average than we thought it would be, but variable by site.
It's always funny how that works. Our estimates are 15% high and 15% low, but at the end of the day, we're always pretty close. And for us, what we noticed was it was kind of harvest timing. It was dependent on harvest timing. Things that we picked after Labor Day that kind of had to sit through a lot of that heat started to dehydrate a little bit and lose kind of a little bit of that weight. So I would say maybe in our Cabernets, we were a little bit lower than average.
Yeah, for us, we're about half of our Napa program is estate and the other half is kind of sourced. So things like Zinfandel, even on Hell Mountain, that came in about average or slightly above. On our estate, we have younger vines that are kind of coming into full production. So it's always a little bit of a guessing game, like where they're going to end up. And that was slightly up, but I think in a good way. Yeah, I think across the board, kind of, compared to some other places, I think I saw another comment about kind of, because we're sourcing from everywhere. I know Paso had a significant spring frost and there was a big shortage on fruit down there. But I think up here, it was kind of close to that average.
Wonderful. Well, let's move on and talk about the actual stylistic signature of the vineyard, of the wines as they are at the moment. What do they taste like? What are your impressions, from running the whole spectrum from sparkling through, still Pinot Noir and Chardonnay to Cabernet Sauvignon, et cetera?
For sparkling, myself, I'm very excited about it. Like I said, we had like one of the most optimal harvests in August. The cold night really helped keep the acidity. So we have wines that are really bright and juicy and zesty. I think what is a characteristic of this harvest is flavors were there, and flavors were there early. So I see today like wines that are extremely balanced, like I said, with lots of acidity. So sparkling has been very, very good. For still wine, lucky as well to be able to have picked before that massive heat wave. And it was interesting because I felt like the Cabernet, the extractions were easy, so we didn't have to add enzyme or anything like that. So it was the quality of the juice was pretty exceptional for me.
Yeah, we saw pretty high quality, like Sauvignon Blanc was very aromatic. Chardonnay was good concentration, good weight. And with the reds, it was another, I would say, classic Napa Valley vintage. Good quality in terms of color, came out easily. Like Pauline said, solid amount of tannin came out. We didn't have to work things really, really hard to get what we wanted from them. And we ended up pressing a lot of stuff relatively early, just because we had the tannin that we wanted. So, it's always interesting this early on. Is it a great vintage or is it an exceptional vintage? It's hard to tell, but the stars are sort of aligning that it's another pretty awesome Napa Valley vintage.
Yeah, I think I'm in total agreement. It kind of tastes like 16, 19 vintages like that. It's hard to say because I remember those wines changed so much, as they were 18 months down the road, like right around bottling, you can kind of really tell. But but just the amount of concentration, color, the intensity is kind of there. This, you know, we sometimes joke and call it like the stuffing. There's definitely a lot of stuffing in the wines, a lot of weight.
Yeah, we sell a lot of grapes to different partners, and that's been the feedback we've received is, you know, the color is tremendous this year. They're bold, full wines, a lot of texture. So very excited about this vintage.
Great.
We're able
Well,
to find.
sorry to interrupt you, Matt. Well, thank you very much. We've got just a couple minutes left to answer some questions. We've got a technical question that is interesting. I'm going to read the whole thing to you all here that says, why do you feel vineyards in Napa were able to withstand some of the longer stretches of heat, especially during harvest? Are practices changing? Is technology to monitor water stress and irrigate accordingly improving? Is shade cloth making a major impact? Trellis systems, curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah, my feedback is absolutely. I think what we're starting to do viticulturally is certainly making a difference. I think starting off with the heavy winter that we had, that soil moisture was just pivotal and got our vegetative growth going so strong in May and June. So we had that natural shade canopy to endure the heat. But then, you know, as we're looking at kind of our soil cultivation practices, you know, a lot of this no-till, the temperature variance on no-till versus tillage is pretty dramatic. I mean, we've seen upwards of, you know, 40, 50 degrees difference. And we're starting to incorporate that in a lot of places where we can. There's certain soil types that aren't conducive in those environments where we can't try to manage additional heat stress with kind of irrigation monitoring and controls, and we'll apply shade cloth. But I think, you know, cultural practices with, you know, your soil and I guess your floor management is a big deal.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Matt. Like floor management, understanding your vine's water status has changed a lot in the last 15 years. So how we monitor soil moisture, how we manage water stress on the vine, and how people are looking at that. You know, there's a lot of different opinions, but there's a lot of technology in Napa to be able to understand what is the vine doing versus, well, it's going to get hot, let's throw water on and hope for the best. You know, 20 years ago, when it got hot, everyone just irrigated. Now people are going and looking at, what does the vine look like? What is its water status? What is our soil moisture like? What's our evapotranspiration like? Does this vine actually need water, or will it be okay? And that's changed a lot. So I think that's one of the reasons why Napa does so well in terms of year in, year out quality, and just the amount of expertise here. This is where everybody comes. This is where you have the best viticulturists, the best vineyard managers, and a lot of them together exchanging ideas and how we do things. So this is the part of the job I love.
Yeah, I think one of the other ones is like the shift in what rootstocks are used.
Oh,
there's a lot more drought tolerant, lot less 10114 around than there used to be.
I'm going to interject with one final question, which is, what did chemistries look like? Normal, TAs up, pH down, harvesting at same bricks, or above or below normal?
I think Pauline should start.
So very different from last year. Last year we didn't have the alcohol, or we didn't have the sugar. This year we had the sugar accumulation. Acid were, like I said, on the high side, as we were able to do like a lot of malolactic fermentation, like we did a 79%, because we had that high malic as well. So we're picking malic at like 6, 7, sometimes 8 grams per liter of malic, which tells you that it was actually a cold night, not necessarily a cold year, because it was a warmer year. But everything was in balance. So I think it was nice to see, like, so we picked between 18 and 19 bricks, and that at that level we're at like 9, 10, sometimes 11 grams per liter of TA, which is really, really good for sparkling.
Yeah, we're pretty. I'm trying to think back. I see so many analysis. There was nothing unusual about it. It all looked. We weren't having to do any massive adjustments in terms of acid. It all looked pretty normal. We do a lot of tracking of sugar loading, so grams of sugar per berry rather than bricks. and that was pretty close to normal, as was the percentage of water, except vineyards, it's like you had the occasional vineyard which really struggled during the heat, and so the percentage of water went down, and obviously bricks goes up. But outside of that, I mean, it was a vintage where you didn't have to stress as a winemaker or look at the analysis and go, oh God, what am I going to do here? It was, I don't want to say textbook, but less stressful than say last year, where it was so cool. You were constantly second guessing yourself that you were doing the right thing.
And I think the picking decision were even in terms of appellation throughout the valley, where some years like last year, it was you had to switch completely what you were doing based on the sugar accumulation, based on the acidity dropping. So I think I agree with you, Richie. It was pretty textbooks and pretty balanced and somewhat pretty easy to manage.
It came like if you were to look at a textbook and you say you start with your sparkling and your aromatic whites and your full body whites and your light body reds and your full body reds. I've only had a couple of vintages like that, Napa, and this year was one of them. So
Bertus, Matt, any last
Yeah, I only had one, I think one vineyard block come in that was that from analysis seemed like it was just pure dehydration, and that was before the cold weather that Matt spoke about, that kind of 5 days of respite that we all got and got to catch our breaths. But I feel like that was like a kind of a crucial moment in a way, because it gave the vines a moment to like take a breath as well. And then like right after that, things were very on par with like what I was expecting. You know, I had a lot of concentration, kind of normal bricks levels for the intensity I was tasting. So I was kind of expecting that, but yeah, I only had kind of one Napa vineyard that I was like, oh, that just seems like pure dehydration, where it just lost moisture. Like, and I mainly say that because like I had this is Zinfandel, and it had like a malic acid of 5, and I was like, oh, okay, this just seems like it's dehydrated, but it tasted great. But very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, from us, it was just, you know, kind of a proportional kind of balance of that bricks with the heat you had. You might expect that those bricks shot up so quickly, and you know, your acids weren't able to follow. But I think because we had that strong vegetative canopy, I think those vines were able to balance themselves, you know, throughout the season.
Yeah, we didn't see bricks as like, obviously when you get warm weather, bricks go up, they get high, but it wasn't like this massive dehydration shift where, okay, I'm at 24 bricks on Friday, and you hit out to that block again the next week and it's at 28 to 30. We didn't see anything silly like that. It's like the vines, I don't want to say they just took it in their stride. They were definitely stressed, but they weren't reacting with severe dehydration.
Well, we are out of time. So I wanted to thank you all so much. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you to the Napa Valley grape growers, the Napa Valley vintners, and to everybody listening. I hope I enjoy having a glass of some 2024 in the not too distant future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.